Hi, this is Josh with Dream Body Clinic. Today we're going to talk about what is a stem cell and which ones are best for treatments. So there's a few different types of stem cells, and this is where things get very confusing for a lot of people. There are embryonic stem cells, there are hematopoietic stem cells, and there are mesenchymal stem cells. These are the primary ones available today for treatments. So embryonic stem cells we'll start with. These are probably the most famous and what people usually think of when they think of a stem cell. An embryonic stem cell can become any type of tissue. So it almost sounds magical, like if you get them right, you put them into the right place, like say your heart, they'll create new heart cells and you're healed. But unfortunately, that's not how they end up working. So embryonic stem cells are taken from tissues like aborted fetuses or aborted babies. And the thinking was that since they can turn into any type of cell because this baby is growing and all those cells start with the embryonic stem cells, they could make it work. This was a big controversy when Bush was in office in the United States, and what they did is he didn't ban stem cells, he just banned the funding of that kind of research. His advisors told him they didn't think it would work. Well, it turns out they were right. The state of California ended up spending $2 billion on research and found out that it did not work. Embryonic stem cells typically want to become a baby. So they typically become tumors or cancer in patients, and that kind of was the end of the road for that type of stem cell. There's a few clinics out there claiming that they're doing embryonic, stem cells, but if you look deeper into it, it looks like they're actually just taking tissue from that initial embryo and then creating basically mesenchymal stem cells. Because again, you don't want the HLA markers from another person. HLA is human leukocyte antigen, and embryonic stem cells would have those markers. It would be trying to make tissue for that person that it was going to become. So that's another problem there. So embryonic don't work. The few clinics that claim to have it are clearly using mesenchymal cells, but using a pretty unethical source, at least unethical for most people. I mean, that's for each person's moral decision to decide, but that's that. The next are what are called hematopoietic stem cells. So going back in time, these are probably the most used stem cells out there for actual medical treatments. And that is because they are highly effective in blood-borne cancers. And this is because hematopoietic stem cells' main job is to create new red and white blood cells. So that's really good for these blood-borne cancers, sort of like leukemia. Now, the thing is though, they're not so good for joint treatments. You don't want to do your knees or shoulders or back or anything with a hematopoietic stem cell, because red and white blood cells, well, white blood cells at least, can only heal via fibrosis. Red blood cells actually cause inflammation. Like when they do PRP, you have to be sure not to take the red blood cells or you're going to create inflammation. So neither of these are good for healing tissue. Scar tissue is the big problem that prevents most of us from healing the way we should. So putting more white blood cells in the area, it's a bad idea. And then you have the fact that these cells, hematopoietic stem cells, actually transfer DNA. So what they've found, and forensic investigators have found this fascinating, but if a person had a bone marrow transfer from, say, like their sister because they had leukemia, they would then take on the DNA of their sister or whoever that donor was. And after a few months, if they went and committed a crime and there was DNA left, they would actually show up as the donor. So that's where a lot of the fears of DNA transfer come from, is from hematopoietic stem cells. And then that gets us to the third type of stem cell, mesenchymal stem cells. And that's what we use here at Dream Body Clinic. These don't have HLA markers, human leukocyte antigen. So they don't have the marker from the donor. So we can take them from anyone, and they're called immune privileged. The immune system just leaves them alone because there's no HLA markers to tell them to attack it. They also don't transfer DNA because the way they work is not by becoming different tissues. They work via what's called the paracrine effect. And the paracrine effect means they send out signals. They're like the manager on the construction site, barking orders, telling everyone where to go, what to do. And with that, they never differentiate into any other type of cell. They're not becoming anything else. So in your body, they're not really a stem cell. The man who named them, Dr. Arnold Kaplan, he discovered them in the early 90s, and in the lab he could turn them into fat cells, ligaments, tendons, bone marrow, these different things, and he thought it was amazing because these are stem cells. Well, think of it, they came from like the mesenchyme system, and we'll call them mesenchymal stem cells. The name stuck, and now we have all this confusion because we have different types of stem cells, and unless you're a biologist, you don't learn the difference. When they're in your body, so he wishes he could rename them medicinal signaling cells. But the name stuck, and we're stuck with MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells. So that's where that is. That is why we use that kind of cell. There's no risk of rejection, and we can take them from other, sources. Like in our case, we use umbilical cord tissue and placenta, and then we replicate those cells. We find the replicated cells are the best because they grow up in the Garden of Eden for stem cells, this perfect culturing medium where they can replicate and be as healthy as they can be at the perfect temperature, and when they get put into a body, they're ready to work. Unreplicated cells, they can use those in the United States, in Europe, a few places where that is legal because there's no manipulation. So it's considered a treatment, not a medication. But once you start cultivating, it's now considered a medication by like the FDA, so it's not allowed. It's a pretty stupid rule. I think it's really in place to protect pharmaceutical companies, because now if you could, you'd have to get through all 4-phase trials of the FDA. That can cost you like hundreds of millions of dollars, and you can't patent it at the end. So who's going to spend that money other than a big pharmaceutical company? And if they can't profit off it because they're just opening the market to everyone else, it doesn't make sense. So you can get mesenchymal stem cells from any tissue that has capillaries, because a mesenchymal stem cell is actually what's called a pericyte. They live on the capillaries on the outside. They look like little octopuses, squeezing and releasing like these tentacle-looking portions of them. And when you're injured in an area near there, like say my elbow here, they come off, they go there, and they start guiding the healing process. They first guide the removal of scar tissue, which is in the way because when we hit bone maturity around age 18 for women or 21 for men, we lose 90% of our capillaries. We don't need that blood flow. We're not growing taller. Thus, we lose 90% of our pericytes, which are our mesenchymal stem cells. And you don't heal as well. White blood cells get to the area and do a patch-up job, and now your normal healing factors like growth factors cannot get past that. So we put mesenchymal stem cells into joints that are injured, gets rid of the scar tissue, then guides the tissue regeneration, and you get long-lasting results. You heal like you did when you were a little kid. That's the magic of this type of stem cell. So any tissue that has capillaries, you can get mesenchymal stem cells from. Like we could do a biopsy of my bicep, for example. We could isolate the mesenchymal stem cells and we could inject them in you. There'd be no chance of rejection. But the problem is my age. I'm 40. You don't want my old stem cells. You want the youngest, healthiest stem cells out there. You want them from, in this case, like umbilical cord tissue. It's only about 9 months old, has had limited experience to an immune system, so it doesn't have any of the defaults or issues like autoimmune diseases, and they'll work perfect. They also replicate much faster because they're younger. The older you are, or the older the mesenchymal stem cell is, mine would be 40 years old, they're going to replicate much slower than a 9-month-old mesenchymal stem cell. So we can get larger numbers. This keeps costs down, allows us to put a larger number in, and that's more effective. Some people want to argue and say these are daughter cells, but all cells are daughter cells. We all started from a single cell. So a daughter cell is what they call when meiosis happens and cell replicates, it splits. You've now got a clone basically. Well, that's a daughter cell. So even the mesenchymal stem cells you have initially from that initial round, say with like, a umbilical cord in the US, that is still a daughter cell. So it's replicating them just gives you more effective younger cells, and that's why we use them. In the US, you can also use adipose tissue, with this fat tissue. They do a liposuction. The problem there is you're lucky if you get 100,000 cells that way, and it's not technically a stem cell therapy. Like Dr. Arnold Kaplan gets very upset at this, at groups calling it that, because it's clever marketing. But when they do is they take that liposuction, they put it in a centrifuge and spin it, And basically less than 1% of the liquid they inject into the person is mesenchymal stem cells. So it's a cell therapy, but even if you get results, you don't know if it was from the few mesenchymal stem cells in there or something else. The same applies to bone marrow treatments. You're lucky if you get 10,000 cells there because there's no capillaries in the bone marrow. Mesenchymal stem cells are in there free floating, but there aren't a lot of them. So again, you take that, you put it in, less than 1% are mesenchymal stem cells. It's a cell therapy. So it's clever marketing, but it's like when Coca-Cola would try to sell you an apple juice and then it says all natural, but you read the back label, it says 99% sugar and water, 1% juice from concentrate. Is that really all natural apple juice or orange juice? No. So there's a lot of marketing games going on. There's, a lot of new terms coming out. Some people are trying to say like hypoxic stem cells or, in a 3D matrix. And all that means is they're using a bioreactor. Problem there is you then have to freeze the stem cells. That's not good because you have to thaw them, and in the freezing or thawing process, there's a high chance of killing those cells. We use incubators and flasks with a culturing serum so that we can take the cells out of culture and within 24 hours apply them to patients, never frozen, as healthy and fresh as they can be. We've looked at every angle to do this. We have the ability here in Mexico where we're at to do these any way we want. That's the beauty here. We could do the fat derived, we could do bone marrow, we can use umbilical cord, placenta, whatever we want, but we found the best source and the best results come from umbilical cord tissue and placenta replicated in the lab, meaning cultured, and then applied in very large numbers to patients. So we're constantly honing this in, we're constantly doing everything we can to improve it. We built one of the largest stem cell clinics in the world here in Puerto Vallarta called DreamBody Clinic, calling it DBC Medical Center. It's a facility. We've now built the lab on site, so we're one of the only places in the world that has everything on site with the licenses, which almost nobody has, and with all of the proper air filtration that I don't think, anyone other than like Panama has that. So we've done it right. We've done it to like above world-class standards, and we're trying to help people as best we can. So if you want to learn more, get a hold of us at www.dreambody.clinic. You can call us toll-free anytime at 833-445-9089. I'm Josh. Happy to help.